Reconstructing philosophy. Hello, and welcome to the Reconstructing Philosophy podcast. We're now on episode 4, and we're still talking about philosophy being done in the local region. Joining me today is Dani Yousif from the Wilfrid Laurier University. Dani's interested in the metaphysics of death, existentialism and free will, and the determinism debate. Dani is currently pursuing a master's degree from Laurier, where he's researching the role that ambivalence plays in the free will and determinism debate. Welcome, Dani. Thanks for being here.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
So what have you been working on lately?
So now I'm just finishing up the master's at Laurier. So getting excited for that, trying to figure out what to do next. Will I pursue a PhD or find a career, I guess. So I am thinking about those two options, and contemplating some business ideas that I'm currently playing around with. So yeah, those are the big decisions, just finishing up the master's and thinking about what to do next.
Yeah, it's a decision I remember well. It's a kind of a scary decision.
Yeah.
How'd you get into philosophy in the first place?
So I'm actually 29, so a bit of backstory is that I got into Laurier at around 23, 23. The reason I got into philosophy was because I thought it was all about, self-help and figuring out the deep questions of life, like what's the meaning of life, what is my purpose, things of that nature. So I started reading a bunch of different what I thought was deep philosophical books, like some of the Stoics, Epicurus, Marcus Aurelius, like this kind of philosophy, and then reading like Napoleon Hill and some psychology, some positive psychology. So that's what I thought going into philosophy. And then when I actually got into university doing it, it was completely different. But I fell in love with the topic, and I want to keep pursuing it.
Interesting. So you're doing the master's program at Laurier right now. How do you find it, especially with the lockdown situation?
Honestly, the faculty at Laurier is amazing. So I've had the pleasure of working with them throughout the undergrad. So seeing them transition online was kind of funny, but they did it perfectly. Like, it's funny seeing my professors online for the first time, after seeing them face to face for so long, and seeing that kind of not struggle, but just watching them adapt in real time, kind of, because it was like a trial and error thing throughout. And it was exciting just to see what they were going to do and how they took it. But I think probably like halfway through the first semester, it had its own benefits, and we became used to it at that point. I think the hardest part was kind of personal responsibility and accountability was the hardest, because when you go to campus, it's easier to study. When you see them live, it's easier to focus in class, whereas on Zoom or something, you could just mute and, I don't know, go go get a snack or something. Like, it's easier to step away and to focus and to do these kind of things with screen fatigue and all this. I'm sure you've encountered it yourself, but yeah, but they adapted really well. It was more like a personal kind of struggle that we had to overcome to get used to it again.
So the program at the master's program at Laurier is kind of interesting. I say this from experience. Do you want to describe it a little bit? What it entails?
Sure. So it involves working on the thesis, the MRP, but at the same time we have to not teach a course, but we're teaching assistants, so we have to run the tutorials and then mark all the papers, while at the same time doing coursework and our own research. So it is quite a heavy workload, but it's honestly, TAing was very fun. I enjoyed it a lot, and it was nice seeing, like saying something to like for me what is a simple idea now, and just seeing minds explode was very cool, especially because I was one of those people in first year. So just being on the other end of that now is very interesting. But the program's amazing. Working on the thesis, it's definitely different working academically on a paper instead of being graded for it. So,
Yeah.
and then working with my supervisor Neil Campbell is very interesting. Watching him, watching the differences from a student to a professional that's helping me write something that could hopefully get published. Yeah.
It's an interesting time, I guess, for an academic, where you sort of step out from that, I'm just a student, to now sort of becoming more of an academic as a kind of profession almost.
Yeah.
You so and the program's kind of at Laurier is kind of interesting because you don't have a traditional thesis, right? You have a major research paper that you write, and it has to be presented.
Yeah. Yeah.
So did you how long ago were you doing that?
The conference was on May 10th.
May 10th. And that was all online?
That was all online. Yeah, the first one. So I guess the cohort before us didn't even get the conference because that was right when COVID hit.
Oh.
So, and I had a couple friends in that cohort, so they didn't even have the conference. So this was the first year, and it was, I guess, the first online year of them doing it. So it was a nice shift to see. Well, I mean, we were experimenting, but it was, yeah.
Was that your first conference that you had to present?
Yes, that was the first conference. Before that, it was just presentations and things of that nature, but never an actual online conference.
It's interesting because, like, the chance to do, or the chance to present your initial research and your MRP at a conference is it's a unique opportunity for a master student, and now having to jump straight into it and to do it online is something else entirely as well. So it's kind of interesting. Just so people who aren't aware, so at Laurier you have to you start writing a research paper, and then you have to present your initial research at a conference every year in front of all the department and all the other students.
Yeah.
What do you think of that experience? Did you really enjoy it, or?
Yeah, for me, it was very enjoyable. I mean, like, it's nice because, well, at least for me, I mean, these people have been teaching me for the previous 4 years, so standing up in front of them and then defending a work is a lot different because now it's a different kind of criticism. They're trying to be philosophical with your work. Like, they're trying to attack and find holes in it that could strengthen your paper or your arguments, right? So just seeing it from that perspective was different, especially the whole faculty there. But it's super. The experience is invaluable. I wonder how it would be different in person, because there's going to be that imposter syndrome left. Like, if I have to do it in person now, presenting is different. So that transition might be different, but it's also nice to have online experience, right? It's made me more comfortable to do this with you, for example.
Oh, that's good. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if you find a lot more conferences are done online in the future. So I mean, it's always good to get experience either way. I mean, whether you're actually in person presenting a paper or online, but I mean, at least it's nice that Laurier sort of gives you that opportunity to sort of take the step into the sort of world of an academic conference and sort of stretch your legs and see what it's like.
Yeah. And did you you're done your PhD, right?
Yep.
So how different was defending your dissertation compared to, the conference, just for my own information?
Well, I mean, it would be different anyways, because obviously it's a PhD as opposed to a master's. Yeah. But I mean, it was unique to me because I had never actually defended something quite like that in that way, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, when you go in for a PhD, it's several hours. You're in a committee. You get grilled by that committee 2 or 3 times. There's cycles of questions that you go through, and I mean, but by that point, you've written and revised and practiced and prepared for everything so much that I didn't find it to be too nerve-wracking. Despite not having defended anything quite like that in that way before.
Yeah, so it's the conference times like 50 or something like that. But the conference, I guess, is a good step. It's a good step in that direction.
It's obviously you're defending your work in public, but it's just such a more sort of formal process.
Yeah.
It's not just anybody who has a hand up kind of thing or anything like that. Like you're going through the committee and each person is questioning you one at a time, and each one has their own questions and they'll have follow-up questions and
Exciting.
So it's an interesting experience, but I mean having had the opportunity to do both is great as well. I loved having the ability to go to a conference before I actually went to a full conference.
Yeah. No, definitely. It's a great opportunity.
What was the what size was the cohort this year of master students?
It was only 5 of us.
Oh yeah, that was
Very
about
small.
that was about what happened to me too. It was the year I was
really?
there. There was about 4 or 5 of us, or about 5, maybe 5 or 6. But it was not a big group.
No,
And
I love the size of it though. It's very tight knit.
yeah. I liked it too. We were all pretty close. We knew each other. I mean, we all took the same classes together, so we got to know each other quite well by the end of the year. And yeah, it was a really great experience having something that kind of small.
Yeah.
And then you'd go to I went to University of Waterloo, and like the class sizes were quite a bit bigger because you have master students and PhD students, and there's just more of them. So
yeah.
So it was quite a shift for me when I got to Waterloo.
Yeah. Well, I'd imagine compared to 5. But yeah, it turned out that the cohort I was in also became like a really good support system for each other through COVID. Like we were motivating each other, through a group chat and things of that nature. So it was nice seeing that aspect.
Oh yeah, I bet it would be even more tricky, and the fact that you're having to adapt by learning to be a teaching assistant, doing regular tutorials, right?
Yeah, you kind of learn that under fire. But yeah, it's great. I mean, I guess there is no other way to learn those skills.
I mean, it's a great way to practice your public speaking, because by the time you're done, you've already been doing tutorials every week with students. Sometimes the I don't know what size the class sizes are now, but I think a tutorial in my day was about 20 students, maybe.
Yeah, for us it was max 25, and on Zoom, so very exactly the same, because some people don't show up, so it averages at around 18 to 20 people anyway.
Yeah, it's an interesting opportunity at Wilfrid Laurier. So your research that you've been doing with Neil Campbell, it's been on the free will and determinism debate. So what fascinates you about the free will and determinism debate? Why pursue this?
So we started off, my interests are in the improvement of the individual and things of that nature, solving the big questions, and that's what kind of drew me to philosophy. So you can't have those conversations, at least meaningfully, if we're not free. So like if you're looking at any kind of character formation or what makes somebody, let's say, great or something like that, like you're looking at person X is confident, and you're like, can I become confident, right? And then you can't have that kind of discussion in a meaningful way if we haven't solved free will versus determinism, right? Like, was I destined to become confident, or is it in my power to do so? So I think it's a really good, maybe not the baseline, but very important to get a grip on. It's kind of like within psychology how they talk about a fixed versus a growth mindset, right? Like if you have a fixed mindset and actually believe nothing can change, and then actually nothing can change, because of determinism, you kind of get left with very weird outcomes, especially in terms of morality and, again, character formation and things of that nature. So free will and determinism is very interesting because it opens up to a lot of the things that I think matter.
Yeah, it might be worth maybe mentioning or discussing a few things about the debate, just sort of more generally for those who aren't well versed in their philosophical backgrounds. So why are philosophers so interested in the free will and determinism debate? And a lot of it seems to revolve around issues of morality, right?
Yeah, so that definitely becomes a problem because, like right now, if you couldn't have done otherwise, like I like saying destined or fated or something like that, but in the philosophy, it gets deeper than just destiny and fate and things of that nature, right? It could be psychological factors, genetics, whatever is controlling us, right? Hidden controllers. But if you couldn't have done otherwise, then I can't really hold you morally responsible for something. So, like, if you see a crime happening, like you see this guy stab somebody, and they couldn't have done otherwise, right? They were determined to do so. It would be wrong to hold them morally responsible because they couldn't have done otherwise, right? Whereas if they were free, then we can put that morality on them. So we actually had a class on reactive attitudes, and if someone is not morally responsible, is it better to, act as if, like, let's say the world is determined, is it better to act as if they had control so we can still hold that person morally responsible, even though they're not? So, is the murderer or whatever responsible or not for their actions? Could they have done otherwise or not? And that's really the base of the conversation. It seems wrong to hold them morally responsible if they can't do otherwise. You could still feel bad and know that was a bad action, and feel for the family and so on, but it seems wrong to hold that person accountable, like morally responsible for that action, right? You could still punish them, but you're not necessarily free in doing it.
What so what about the free will and determinism debate are you working on right now?
So right now we're looking specifically at Robert Kane, Harry Frankfurt, and Alfred Mealy. So Robert Kane's a libertarian, so he's defending an account of free will that is very specific and peculiar in the way it works. And Harry Frankfurt is a compatibilist, so he's trying to find a middle ground between libertarian free will and determinism. Like, can I be a little bit destined and a little bit free, kind of thing, versus the full determinism, whereas you have no control, like it's all out of our control. So Harry Frankfurt is trying to reconcile it from a scientific background, because he doesn't want to leave free will up to things like God or fate or destiny, right? Because he wants the conversation to continue, and he wants science to pick it up. Whereas now it seems scientifically, at least psychologically, a lot of the control seems to be out of our hands, let's say, when you talk about social conditioning and the way you're brought up, your biology, the time period you're in, the family you were born into, your socioeconomic status, etc., etc. It seems that this kind of freedom is severely limited to the point where we might not have it at all. Like, if we knew all the psychological factors, kind of thing, maybe we could tell everything about you and what you're going to do next and so forth. You're not actually free, right? So that's the position that Kane is trying to advocate against. He wants to make room for free will, and specifically the free will is within character formation. So he's saying, look, we might not have a radical kind of freedom, as long as we have freedom over the kind of person we want to become, over our will, over our desires themselves. Yeah.
So you have two different kinds of philosophers, right? So or you have Frankfurt who takes a sort of view on freedom that's very different from Kane, and it seems like what you've latched onto is the difference that they have, or at least one of the differences that they have is how they treat ambivalence, right?
Yeah, so that's the part I'm picking apart for my MRP. I find that very interesting because for Kane, it's within ambivalence that you have moments where you can determine your character. So he brings up the example of the businesswoman who, on her way to work, sees an assault happening. And she's on her way to a very important business meeting that, let's say, if she goes to it, she'll get a promotion. She's been working on it for months, whatever. She's ambitious, and and this is, let's say, the completion of that ambition. And then on the way there, she sees an assault happening, which is going to make her late, and she wants to be moral, right? So she has good reasons for both of these things. And then Kane says, in that situation of ambivalence, this woman is divided within herself, right? She has a desire to be moral but she also has the competing desire to be ambitious, right? And depending on the action she chooses, she starts to set her will in that direction. So if she chooses to be moral over ambitious, right, in similar situations in the future, she'll choose the moral action. And it's in that moment where you're conflicted within yourself and thinking about the kind of person you could be, that free will comes up. And the way he defends that kind of, let's say, psychologically or biologically is saying something like, look, even in the way you think, right, if we were actually determined, there would be no reason for our neural pathways to even struggle, right? Like you would just choose an option. Like, why would you need that kind of consciousness or reflection upon the situation? Your brain would just automatically have a set path determined for you, right? So the fact that we have alternative possibilities, the fact that right now I can mute myself, unmute myself, stand up, sit down, and I can make all these things happen, opens up the discussion for free will. And then by choosing between these different options, that's how I begin to shape my character free from the past. So that's the key, is that we're trying to find a way to break that backwards causal chain, right? So we can actually say we're free to a degree.
And so this is very different from Cain, whose position is that you have to be like wholehearted about what you want to do, and not there shouldn't be room for ambivalence and his conception of free will, right?
Yeah, so that's actually Frankfurt, and it makes sense, right? Like when you hear about Frankfurt, like I think his heart is in the right place. Wholehearted. Okay, that was a bad pun, but I think his heart's in the right place because when you think about free will, it seems weird to talk about, an inner struggle. So it seems, because think about it, if you're wholehearted in your actions and there's no conflict within you, it seems like you're free at that moment, right? You're free from internal struggle. You know what you want, right? So, and he breaks it down into like ordering your desires, right? So I might have the first order to desire to smoke a cigarette. And then the second order desire is me finding it meditative and enjoying it, right? So I don't even think about quitting. I'm a wholehearted smoker. And in that way, it seems like that agent is free. Like they're free because their desires align with their actions, right? What I want is aligning with how I'm acting. So it makes sense, and it's appealing, and I could see why a lot of people want to take on Frankfurt in that way, but it becomes problematic.
Sure, and so Cain has a very different view where his position is that you need these moments of ambivalence to create what he calls self-forming actions, right?
Exactly.
Can you explain what a self-forming action is?
Yeah, so it is just that businesswoman. So by choosing in the moment of ambivalence, where you have different versions of yourself that you could be, and you have good reasons for both, and you can make both happen, right? That's the key. It's like you need the reality. You have to be able to bring these things into reality, one or the other. And then by choosing, right, because you're not determined at that point to choose one or the other, because you could make both happen, you begin to form yourself, right? So it's a self-forming action in these moments. By removing the ambivalence, you've began to shape, or you have shaped your character in a certain direction.
So would Cain treat the self and your character as being the same thing then? And would either of those be different from, for example, just what I might call like a collection of habits that I have?
See, that's what I've been trying to deal with. Like, is it just a habit, right? But Cain does seem to make it about bigger, or at least more, how to word this, morally important characteristics of yourself. Let's say something like, the woman choosing between ambition and being moral is more than, choosing between to eat a sugary food or, maintaining my diet. So like you could feel the ambivalence between, eating a donut right now and having water. But it seems like those don't qualify as self-forming actions. He does want them to be these more meaningful occasions or deeper things that will shape your character in a certain direction. But that's something I'm still parsing out, and I'm not sure that I align with him there. But
I think so it seems like, and maybe we'll loop back to this in a second, because your paper sort of takes issue with the self-forming action in terms of like how much control over it do we have, are the kind of situations that we are able to engage in these self-forming actions, do those situations only come about through luck, right? Like, this is one of your concerns.
Yeah.
And I think part of what I think I'm trying to figure out is exactly what exactly counts as a self-forming action. So the difference between whether I choose to drink coffee or tea, is that a self-forming action? Is it? I mean, if the basis is just to determine whether whether I am the agent that's choosing the sort of character that I have that makes me me, and then I can assign responsibility to me, then it really shouldn't matter, it seems to me, whether that self-forming action is about coffee or tea, or whether it's about some sort of larger moral issue.
You have no choice.
I think I agree with that, Ray, and that's something that I've been trying to flesh out a bit more with Dr. Campbell is, why is it just these, let's say, serious or bigger things like ambition or something like that compared to the coffee you drink? Because, maybe the coffee you drink eventually leads you to becoming a moral character or something like that, like it's not like that, but why these over these? And I'm not sure that I align with Kane there. I do think habits are important, and the formation of our habits is, and if we really do want to say that free will is, it seems weird to limit free will to just these bigger moral issues, right? And say, look, these other things aren't part of yourself, or these other things don't form yourself, or something like that. So yeah, I'm there with you. I'm trying to figure that out for myself, and I do think habits are very important. But for him, I think he would just go back to something like, it seems different to say that you're morally responsible for the coffee or tea over you're morally responsible for, being ambitious or moral, right? It seems they're just categorically different, at least in degree. It'd be hard to say, oh, this habit was free, this one wasn't, this one was because of childhood, this one wasn't. Whereas for something like being ambitious or, of that nature, we want to figure out where that came from, and do you deserve responsibility over that? Are you morally responsible for stabbing that person or not? Is different than are you morally responsible for drinking coffee over tea?
Sure.
At least in significance.
I think. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm not sure I agree with that. I'm still unsure. I still do think habits are very important. I'm just not sure how to make that direct connection to self-forming actions without diluting them or diluting them too much, right? And losing their significance, because they are these kind of moments where you do shape your character. Yeah,
I mean, the thing is, I almost worry that there's a sort of conflation between trying to understand what makes an action free and what makes it morally responsible. Obviously there's connections, right? But I mean, if I say, if I'm the kind of person who chooses to drink coffee over tea, right, and that's the sort of habit, that's the sort of choice I made once upon a time, and that's just sort of part of my character. I mean, for Kane, it seems fine at that point to say, well, yeah, those actions are free because they stem from your character, right? Regardless of how sort of morally poignant they are, they're still free actions, would they not be?
Yeah, and he does have a section in his book where he talks about these kind of habits that aren't self-forming actions. They're just, let's say, lesser aspects of your character. I'm not too well versed in that exact connection, but I know it's there, and I should be looking into that a bit more moving forward. But
I mean, the thing is, so like part of the issue is, it seems to me, is that for one thing, we want to be able to talk about. I mean, not everybody on an everyday basis faces large moral issues. At least, I mean, we can clarify this in a second, but so if you're talking about freedom, you don't want to only be talking about freedom in very rare cases, it seems to me. But then on the other hand, with Cain, it seems like he has this issue where if he wants to say that there's a difference between more morally poignant cases that would be self-forming actions and lesser cases that wouldn't count as self-forming actions, then he's going to need a very specific account of where that cutoff point is, right? Because like if you drink coffee, like even drinking coffee can be an ethical choice, right? You can choose to drink fair trade coffee, for example.
Yeah. And I think you're completely right in that analysis, right? Because he does have to be very specific about what a self-forming action is, and he does have a whole paper on what exactly qualifies as a self-forming action, compared to these less significant, let's say, decisions. I'm at the top of my head, I don't remember. He breaks it down very logically. He has a whole logical formula, 6 or 7 different premises, and then a conclusion on what qualifies as a self-forming action. Is exactly this situation. So he would definitely defend it better than I'm giving justice to him now. I do know that for him it is a bit more serious, and it shouldn't be conflated with these lesser things. I don't know how he defends that, but just at the top of my head, I had the same problem with you, and that was something that kept coming up, was why only these kind of thing. And it does seem problematic for Cain, and whether he answers that adequately or not, I'm not sure most people will agree, and many people can kind of separate themselves from him there.
In terms of your own views, though, where, like, if you were with, regardless of what Cain might think, where would you stand on this? Do you think that are self-forming actions sort of everyday kind of things, or do they are they something that only comes along in sort of rare cases where we have to make a sort of very poignant moral decision?
For me, I think they're a consequence of the discrepancy I'm talking about. So I do think that, look, your habits do matter, and they trickle out in ways that we might not realize, right? And I do think that they can, let's say, lead to bigger moral things, and they definitely shape our lives. So I think what is important more so is, I guess, that ambivalence where you're actually in that state where you're deciding about the kind of person you want to be. You might not have that kind of moral reflection over drinking coffee or tea, and you might, depending on the kind of tea or coffee you're drinking, right? Like when you said fair trade versus, however else it's gathered, right? You might have a moral discrepancy within yourself there, or a moral ambivalence within yourself there, which could become a self-forming aspect of yourself, right? Because then it'll trickle out possibly into other aspects of your life where you're making these kind of choices. But I do think what you're touching on is very important. I do think these kind of smaller, let's say, self-forming actions are, they are important, and they do possibly add up to a kind of, maybe a bigger Cainian SFA or something like that.
Well, I almost wonder if to some extent it leaves out something important, right? Because like some of the sort of smaller everyday choices that don't necessarily seem to be the most morally poignant can have the most consequential effects overall, right? Like, for example, there's lots of little things that contribute to climate change that people might do or not do, right?
Yep.
Now, and they may not necessarily think about them that much. Some people do, right? They consciously make an effort to, recycle, or they make an effort to reduce their waste or their carbon footprint or whatever. But, are those kinds of cases, it almost seems like Kane may not be he may be less concerned about moral responsibility in those cases, even though overall and down the road, those, how responsible people are for contributing to climate change is a larger issue than just looking at any one person. So if you're talking about moral responsibility in that case, it seems like for Kane, that kind of moral responsibility sort of disappears.
Yeah,
how
definitely.
it's difficult to say, well, you're responsible for climate change because you bought one kind of coffee that was less sustainable over another, right?
Oh, yeah. See, he's not doing it. Okay. How would I answer this? So,
I think I'm like, do you see that as a potential worry that there may be kinds of moral responsibility that Kane may be trying to find, but he's actually brushing over other kinds of moral responsibility that are also really important, especially if we're talking about free will, right?
I think what you're pointing to is something like, your actions led to climate change, versus Kane would just keep reducing it down to, this divided self, this ambivalent person who's contemplating different kinds of versions of the person they could be, right? So whether or not I actually contribute to climate change is secondary to, let's say, the thought, do I want to be that person to contribute to climate change, versus do I want to be somebody who's environmentally conscious, right? So that's the level he's working at. He's not pointing at you and saying you're morally responsible for this, right? He's thinking about the individual within themselves, arguing about the kind of person that you could be, and then if we're free, then we could say they're morally responsible. So you could still separate the action, let's say, from your character formation, right? Like I could point at that action and say, you're morally responsible for that. But then Kane would just go back to saying you're morally responsible for the person you've become, and your action is doing this, and like separate it that way, like your action from your actual will, let's say.
But it seems like in that kind of case that makes it even more difficult to try to separate what he might call self-forming actions from any other kind of action, right? Like if I choose to drink more sustainable coffee, right, is that a self-forming action, even though it's not in and of itself, me and my house, it doesn't make a huge moral difference, but down the road and collectively it can make a huge moral difference, right?
Mm-hmm.
So again, it kind of makes it even more difficult. You either you end up risking confining a self-forming actions to a sort of tiny subset of actions that you end up taking, and then run the risk of skipping or missing kinds of moral responsibility that might be really important. Or you sort of blur that line between self-forming actions, and then it becomes more difficult to say, right?
So I think Kane's working, and he is working with like a very Aristotelian approach, let's say. So saying something like, this confident general became this confident general because of other confident things they did in the past that eventually led to this moment, right? Their confident actions led to them being this person. So they're responsible for their confidence, right? But saying something like, look, we might be limited in our freedom. So Kane's okay with saying like, look, I didn't have much choice between, killing the environment versus, helping it. These choices might be limited depending on the brands of coffee I want, right? Or you could withhold or abstain from coffee altogether. But let's say you can't. You're choosing between, coffee that's ruining the environment and coffee that is. Until it becomes something you consciously think about, right? It's not a problem for Kane. It's when you become that ambivalent person. Like the businesswoman, and I bring this up, she could have just ignored the assault. Like right now when you're driving and you see somebody homeless, you might pay attention and feel bad, or you might just drive because you're busy, right? And not even think about it. It just becomes something else in the background. So until you actually consciously decide, and he does make room for this kind of happening subconsciously, but that's another issue. Let's say you consciously have this internal struggle between doing X or Y. That's when free will comes in, and that's where we claim responsibility, right? And that's where the SFAs are. So it's not necessarily what the outcome is aimed at, right? It's about character formation and saying that you're responsible for this kind of character, not discussing morality or something like that, even though we're saying, so the moral responsibility, right? Or sorry, not moral responsibility, it's ultimate responsibility that you are this person, right? You could be an ignorant person that's destroying the environment, let's say, and just not know it.
Sure.
Yeah, so he's at that kind of level. It's until that person is consciously having that internal struggle.
But
Yeah.
so in that case, the person who is genuinely conflicted about their coffee and thinks about it and they they look at the alternatives and they decide that this is the coffee brand or coffee choice that they want to make. In that case, that would be a self-forming action because there's a sort of conscious consideration of what kind of character they want to be.
Exactly. And that's where you can claim responsibility, because by doing that action and overcoming that ambivalence, he would say something like, now you've set your character so in future situations you would consistently buy the better way, the fair trade coffee. Is that what it is? Yeah. Yeah. So in that way you've shaped your character in that direction. So it might have been a small choice like coffee, but if it's this bigger issue that's at play here, which is, again, that kind of comes back to moral versus, I don't know, cost effective or something like that.
Yeah. So you take issue with Kane's conception of self-forming actions, or at least you have some issues with it. Would you care to elaborate?
So I have problem with 1, ultimate responsibility, and 2, luck. So I start with the luck objection. The problem I have is that when we say things like, look, the businesswoman was on her way to work and she saw an assault happening, right? And she's on her way to work. That situation could have come up by luck, right? So she's sitting there choosing between becoming morally ambitious moral or ambitious, but that whole situation came up by forces outside of herself, right? So she could have just as easily been driving in that direction, the road was closed, and then she goes a different way to work and never sees the assault, and therefore never has that inner conflict between being moral or ambitious, right? So it seems like due to luck, we could have situations that reduce the potential of SFAs happening, right? Like if I just never fall into a situation where I'm ambivalent about being confident or unconfident or something like that, right? Just never have the opportunity or never crosses my mind, due to luck, due to things outside of my control and things of that nature, then it seems problematic, right? Because then there could be a person who's so unlucky that doesn't have any responsibility over their character formation, or some people could have more or less, right? So it really fluctuates in the frequency and the way they arise. So that's the first problem, is luck, right? Like if I am free, I don't want the freedom I have to be due to luck.
I think this is part of the issue when this is why I was asking you earlier about what things get to count as self-forming versus not self-forming, right? Because everybody faces at some point in their life different decisions about which they're ambivalent about, for which they decide that they'll make some sort of decision that will somewhat determine their character, right? Mm-hmm. And that character can later determine other choices and things like that, right?
Yeah.
So while certain specific possible alternative courses of action, while that may be luck, i.e., for example, no one has ever asked me if I would like to be an astronaut, right?
Yeah.
I've never seriously had the opportunity, or never seriously it's never been a serious possibility in my mind to consider whether I wanted to be an astronaut, right?
Yeah.
But to say that I'm that I'm therefore unlucky or unable to be in that case, that I wouldn't be responsible for my actions, despite the fact that several other pieces of my character are formed just fine. it strikes me as weird to say that in that situation, that there'd be a lack of freedom that you wouldn't have.
Yeah, so are you saying that it's hard to distinguish between luck and like the situations over which we have control, or?
Well, I mean, the thing is, while obviously the kinds of situations you find yourself in, such that you would be ambivalent about.
Yes.
While those can, to some extent, be luck. I mean, I wonder if if we're talking about self-forming actions, i.e., actions as forming a self. Everybody seems. I can't imagine anybody not having those, right? Everybody's faced with some decision at some point in their life where they sort of make decisions about what kind of person they want to be, right? Whether it's you want to go into philosophy, do you want to do you want to pursue a PhD in philosophy? All those kinds of things come up. People face in their everyday life. What do you want to do? What do you want to be? Where do you want to work? Where do you want to live? Right.
Yep.
So it seems to be worried about luck for very specific kinds of situations seems to be kind of odd, right? Like, is my character any less well formed because I wasn't given the chance to be an astronaut, or no one ever approached me to be an astronaut? Just like this woman, she had never encountered that situation where she could have intervened and done something moral. Is her character any less formed in that situation?
Yeah. So in this
other
situation,
than just being formed differently, I suppose.
Yeah. So what you're alluding to is something like, the quantity of SFAs. Is that important? So something like, Billy had 20 opportunities, SFA opportunities, where I, because I was unlucky, had 5. Am I actually a less formed character than Billy? And that does seem to be a problem, right? Like the whole reason we're going after this is because we want control over shaping our character, right? So if it's due to luck and it's actually out of our control, then that does seem to be problematic, because again, I could just be unlucky in the way I get to shape my character, right? So Billy might not, it's not even about frequency, but it's the kinds of SFAs that he has might be different than mine, and those just came up because of luck. So we're trying to preserve that luck. Where we quantified is problematic. Like, I don't know whether we say 100 is better than 75, or what the number is to say, look, you're more free than determined, or congratulations, you're free because you have 5 SFAs out of that, like millions of actions or something like that, or choices. So it is problematic quantifying how many SFAs. But when it comes to luck, we still want, what makes free will attractive, right, is the idea that we can have control over the shaping of our will. We don't want that to be due to things like luck. That sounds just as bad as determinism, right? Like, I have no control over the opportunities over which I get to shape my character. So yeah.
If I were a hermit, like living in the woods, right?
Yes.
And I decided that that's what I wanted to do. Like, I'm just a hermit type of person, and I don't really care much for civilization or for people or anything like that. Yeah. So I choose to do that. But by putting myself in that situation, I don't face a lot of SFA type situations, right? I'm not necessarily going to face a lot of morally sort of significant choices to make in that regard. But nevertheless, I mean, the fact that I don't face this situation seems to be because of my character, right? Like, I am a hermit, right? So, but it would strike me as really weird in that case to say, well, because of your lack of SFAs, that therefore you are fundamentally less free than somebody who, maybe has to deal with all kinds of morally problematic issues all the time. To maybe because of a moral being morally unlucky, right? That person is fundamentally more free. It strikes me as a really odd conclusion.
I guess it's just that one of them seems to give us more control over the other. Right, like the hermit, yes, he might have chosen to become a hermit and then all other actions kind of flow naturally or something like that, and the other person is ambivalent consistently, let's say. Between the two people, I think it's more attractive to be the person who had more control over their development, right? And I guess
how do you determine, like, how do you say that the hermit had less control?
So that's pretty much what I'm trying to do with my MRP, is discover where this control is and how we can place it on, like how can we create these situations where we're SFAs so it's not just luck or life giving them to us or something like that. Like how can we create these occasions? If it is possible for us to shape our character, then there must be ways for us to increase them in frequency or something like that. I don't know what the ideal number is or something like that, but the goal is to be able to return some kind of control back to the agent that's not just due to things outside of our control, like luck or, you know, psychological factors and things like that, because Kane is allowing for that. So where can we find this control? What does it look like? And the place that I'm placing, or where I'm placing this kind of control, is in this discrepancy. So for Kane, it's ambivalent situations where you get SFAs where you can shape your character. So the hermit is still going to be ambivalent about things in, you know, his or her life. I'm assuming, like, they're not just going to go throughout life like a kind of Frankfurt wholehearted person that no longer has ambivalence. Like, this person is still going to be
No, I
ambivalent
mean,
situations.
we can even say in this scenario. I mean, maybe they face all kinds of. I mean, maybe they still have to decide if they want to have coffee or drink water or go out hunting and, you know, or forage for berries or whatever it is that hermits do.
Yeah.
I mean, they may have all kinds of. They may make all kinds of choices in their life.
Yeah.
But they may not necessarily be out there to encounter a lot of morally, especially morally poignant situations that they might be more ambivalent about.
Even if we separate the morality and say, are you responsible for, you know, your character? Right? Whether the hermit's doing the right or wrong thing, is different than saying, are, you know, did you have control over the person you are and the person you continue to become, right? Or and
So
I
do you
think
do you think that there's something that there'd be something less free or I don't know want to use the word flawed, but is there something, is the hermit less free then than the for example the businesswoman?
I don't think so, as long as they have the possibility to have SFAs, which just means, you know, being in situations of ambivalence where you're deciding about the kind of person you want to be, right? Then I wouldn't say they're less free. Again, frequency seems to matter, right? The quantity seems to matter, because it doesn't really seem like one is enough. And me and Dr. Campbell were joking about like 5, you know, 5 SFAs is enough to qualify as a free person or something like that. So it's hard to quantify, but I wouldn't say that the hermit is necessarily more free or something like that. Both individuals are shaping their character, and you know, the way they do it might be different. The situations in which they're ambivalent is different. Even the frequency might be different, right? As long as it's more than 0, like, we're okay with having some kind of minimal free will, freedom over your character. So as long as that possibility is open, yeah. But I think both are still shaping their character in a free way. Yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean that sounds about right to me. I mean, they're both shaping their own character. They're just doing it in different ways.
Yeah.
But in one way, the hermit obviously will be very likely less likely to face as many SFA type situations, presumably, just because they're interacting with less people.
And I mean, for sure, right? Like, I mean, there's only so much you could do in a forest or something like that, right?
Yeah,
living your hermit life. So, you know, you might initially have but then even, like, you know, 10 years down, do you still want to be this kind of person that's a hermit? Like, ambivalent situations will still arise. Like, I don't think this hermit, even though they have less, I don't know, choice than a city life or something like that, I don't think they'll ever be at a point where they're completely set, completely wholehearted, like Frankfurt wants, like the person who identifies as a smoker, who loves smoking, who no longer questions it, come what may, I'm smoking, I love smoking. I don't think the hermit's ever going to be at a stage where they're fully, wholehearted. Like, they're still going to have ambivalent situations. Even, I guess this is where the habits could come in, even if it's at small things in their character, like, I'm a hermit, but why do I have a horrible sleep schedule or something like that? Or, why do I only eat squirrel? Or I don't know, like, they're still going to be ambivalent about different things in their life. Am I the kind of person that only eats squirrel? No, I think I can eat, rabbit. And those don't really seem morally significant like Cain wants, but I think that like that's the way the hermit is still shaping their character, right? It might be very boring, or something like that, but
it's the idea that we would ever not face ambivalence, or that we ever couldn't be ambivalent about certain things. Everybody. It seems like everybody faces those situations at some point or another. I mean, everybody at some point isn't sure about what to do, or they need to stop and think about it in a way that might determine their character.
I mean, radical freedom might be. It's interesting. Yeah.
But I am kind of interested though. So, like, can you breathe? Is freedom for Cain? Is it all or nothing? Are you free in some respects? Because maybe in some, you've had some SFAs dealing with certain topics or areas of life, and so therefore you're free in that regard. But in other areas, maybe you haven't had SFAs, so you're less free. Or is it just a binary, like you're free or you're not free?
Yeah, like, I guess you could say that, look, there's certain aspects of yourself that are determined, right? And that just means that you freely formed them in the past, and now they shape how you're acting. I don't know if it's that's a good question. I'm not sure if it's like this action was free, this one wasn't, this one is, this one isn't. Or this aspect of myself wasn't shaped freely, this one was. He's okay with, again, us being determined in some aspects. Like, I didn't get to choose my body, I didn't get to choose my parents, I didn't get to choose, this timeline, the fact that I need air. So I don't need like a radical kind of free will where I can shape every single aspect of my character. All right. But come what may, as long as we have minimally, right? So he's okay with minimal free will. So even minimally, the fact that we have alternative possibilities, again, stand up, sit down, mute, unmute, and I can make all these things happen. The businesswoman can choose to help the person or choose to continue to work. As long as there's options like that, right? That's all that we need for a form of responsibility over the person we've become. The world gave us this possibility. I could have done A, B, and C. I chose B, but I wanted to do C also. But I overcome and chose B. Therefore, I'm responsible for B. So as long as alternative possibilities are open, that's all we need. We don't need total control over our character or radical freedom where I could just snap my fingers and begin to fly. I don't need freedom over natural laws and things of that nature.
So in your paper, you talk about the idea of these self-forming actions possibly coming out as a kind of token form of luck, but you seem to see will setting as being more of a process, as something that takes place over time. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely. Because, at least for Cain, right, the whole point of, or what makes free will attractive is the fact that we can shape our character. And if we can't set our will, and every day our character is different or something like that, then it doesn't, like, what do we have control of, right? So he he does want to say that we should be able to set our character instead, so that way that's what separates it from, you know, freedom of action. It's not just about every day choosing a different action as a character, but it is about shaping your character, and to do that we do have to kind of set an aspect of ourselves, right? At least to a certain degree. All personality theories of psychology deal with, you know, character over time. Doing an action once, you know, it's not necessarily sufficient to say that, you know, this person was confident because they did this confident act once, right? It's when you do it over time that you can kind of say this is a character that is confident, right? Or this is a characteristic of this person.
But I think it's really important to look at the idea of character setting as a kind of process that takes place over time. I mean, people don't sort of determine their characters all at once, or sort of get to a point. I mean, most people, I don't think, at least not completely, get to a point where they sort of completely decide their character, and that just becomes set in stone for the rest of their lives, right?
Yeah. And
so it seems like this is really important if you're going to be talking about free will and determinism, right?
Yeah, no, 100%. That's one of the problems I had with Cain, was saying something like, you know, an SFA comes about when you choose in a moment of ambivalence. You're choosing between being ambitious or moral, let's say. And then once you make this action, all future actions can be determined by that, right? So you're never going to be ambivalent about that situation in the future. Your character is set. And that seemed too strong, you know, saying that, you know, once I've done a self-forming action, the businesswoman, let's say, chose to help the assault victim. In every similar situation in the future, she's always going to choose to, like, you know, do the moral over the ambitious thing. And I think that's too strong. Like, you might be inclined to do the more moral thing in those situations, or it might take less effort for you to overcome temptation in the future to do the moral thing over the ambitious thing. But I still think it's open to change, and that's where we have the free will, and that's also where we make it a process, right? A process that's never necessarily finished, and that's where I diverge from Cain. Yeah.
So I'm kind of interested in this, coming from a pragmatist perspective. So do you think? How important do you think it is to sort of set a kind of through an SFA, a kind of, well, you know, you can call it what you want, a habit or a character trait or whatever. How important do you see those things as being set to the concept of freedom? Because I'm thinking about this in the context of, for example, a scientist who might adopt or might use certain habits or certain rules of action, but ultimately, even if their character leads them to sort of consistently use those kinds of rules or norms or habits, that they wouldn't want them to be fully determinate all the time, because you always want to be able to question its applicability to specific situations. So is there an important element of freedom that we can always shift away from being set to being more ambivalent again if we want to be? Or is that actually even necessary for freedom?
Having the set aspect?
Not just having the set, but being able to go back from being set.
I think that's, well, I think personally, I think it is very important, right? Because because as humans, I think naturally we can go back and question things that we were ambivalent about in the past, and maybe become ambivalent again in the future, right? Like a regret is something like that. At the moment you chose what you thought was the right decision, in the future it comes back and then you're ambivalent again about something that you thought you dealt with, right? And it is important to set things. So it is important for the habit, or for the scientists, let's say, to develop good habits and researching and the way they perform their methods, but you don't want that to be set in stone, right? Like, you still want the capacity to change it if you need to. You don't want to be in the kind of situation where you're ambivalent 24/7 about every situation, right? Like, we don't want to be like that either. We do want to have some things that are set about us, but not permanently set, right? Like a strong inclination or a habit, right? The only way I think you could permanently set something like this for Cain is if it's like, you know, I was very ambivalent about a situation. I overcame it, and then I never questioned it again just because it never came up again, or I forgot about it. But it doesn't mean it can't, right? And if we have control, so the control that I'm bringing up makes necessary the fact that, or is a consequence that we will never have a permanently set aspect of ourselves, right? Of our will. Because if there's control and we're not determined, that means you can always bring up something again. You can always become ambivalent about aspects of your character. I could have worked really hard to become fit, and it's a consequence of my being free and having control that I can, become ambivalent about that again.
How important is it for Kane that our characters be fully set? Does he see it as being something that we should all aspire to do? That we should be fully set?
To be fully set, I'm not sure. The point for Kane might not be all or nothing, but it is to kind of get rid of that ambivalence, right? We do want to remove that ambivalence, and a consequence of that is setting our will. Now, is it something like where we want to be fully wholehearted, like kind of like a Frankfurtian, or like?
Well, I was going to ask because it starts to sound a lot like Frankfurt at that point, right? If you're so fully set that you're not really ambivalent about anything anymore, then while yes, the SFAs are important and you can talk about why they're important to freedom, but ultimately you kind of end up in the same situation as Frankfurt, don't you? Where if you're fully set, then you're kind of wholehearted about everything.
You're determined, yeah, and I think that's okay as long as, again, you could just go back, as long as you had control over the person that is now wholehearted, right? Yeah. So it does kind of become like Frankfurt, but the way they get there is different, because for Frankfurt, ambivalence doesn't necessarily have to show up. Like, you could have just been this person who was born wholehearted or something like that, right? So whereas for Kane, ambivalence is a necessary condition for shaping your character. So yeah, like a zombie or something, like if you're a philosophical zombie, where you just had we're a specific kind of zombie where you had no internal ambivalence or something like that, you're just acting, everything's determined. That's okay with Frankfurt as long as they're wholehearted. Like, this zombie has whatever desires and they're all in alignment. Go ahead, you're free, right? You don't have any internal conflict that's not needed for freedom. Whereas for Kane it is. The end goal does seem to merge, though. So you're right on that, and that is something that I think, I don't know if Kane would have a problem with that, or if he believes that's even possible. But that does sound like the goal, if it is, right?
I mean, it almost sounds like for Kane, the important part in terms of freedom is the ability to set your character. And if your character becomes so set that it's unsettable again, well, it seems like you're almost less free at that point.
Definitely, right? And that seems to be, yeah, right? Like, it doesn't seem like enough to say that I freely shaped this character that's now fully determined.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and he does, I do quote him in my paper where he talks about Martin Luther's "Here I Stand," right? Which is an affirmation, and he says, "I couldn't do otherwise," kind of thing. Like, here I stand and I can't do otherwise. I have to stand here. So obviously he could have done differently, right? Let's say he was determined to say that and do that action, but that was because of earlier SFAs that he was responsible for. So I don't know if that doesn't necessarily sound appealing for me, right? Like, the fact that we get, like I just said, we become this person who's determined, but we freely became determined or something like that. Even though, weirdly enough, that seems to be what we want out of our habits and habit formation and things of that nature. Right? Like, you do want the habit to be confident, so you're not always freaking out about it, or the habit to wake up early, or whatever it is that you're trying to fix in your life, or things that you're trying to develop. It seems like we do want to be determined by them to the point where we act even against our own, like, despite ourselves, right? Like, if yeah, anyway, that's another thing, but that does come up.
So, like, you mentioned just recently, sort of like, what you might desire, what you might want or value in different kinds of accounts, and it kind of made it kind of raised the question to me, because like I think I said before we started, the free will determinism debate is not my wheelhouse in terms of philosophy. So I think what I'm kind of wondering is what kind of an account of freedom are you even trying, not you specifically, but what kind of account of freedom are philosophers looking for? Are they looking for different ways to think about freedom? Are they looking for that metaphysical clue that gives that says yes, that you are free, or are we just talking about different ways to think about freedom that can be helpful for different kinds of debates, such as like moral responsibility cases?
No, that's a good question. The two that we're working with is freedom of action versus freedom of will. So one is like, is what's important the idea that we have, that we can freely choose between multiple actions, or is what's important the idea that we have freedom over not the choosing but the desires that come up? So is it that deeper kind of freedom that's important? So there is many different forms of freedom, and even the compatibilists, like Frankfurt, has his own definition of freedom, right? Like for freedom for him is that kind of wholehearted person that's acting free. It's a different kind of freedom that they're trying to build into their discussion of determinism, but it's a different nature. So yeah, freedom, what kind of freedom we're looking for does become not problematic, but it does become a question that needs to be answered. And what is meaningful for you might shape, or obviously, your account of what you think is important, right? Like some people are okay with freedom of action, whereas some people would want that deeper kind of freedom of will, where some people want to, say I'm free within a determined world, or something like that. But freedom is defined differently. So what one's account of freedom is definitely comes into play here.
So, like with the, as you discussed in your paper, the idea of fully setting your will through SFAs, and you express your own sort of skepticism as to how likely that is and how many people that would actually happen to. So does it make any sense to talk about a conception of freedom that would be foreign to most people? Or that most people wouldn't have a realistic chance of ever obtaining, especially in the context of moral responsibility. Like, does the free will and determinism philosopher, is their responsibility to talk about freedom in a way that makes sense, that allows the public to make sense of moral responsibility issues, or is it more something that should sort of be beyond the public and is this sort of more metaphysical account of what free will is?
So I think in general it is a metaphysical question, right? Like, are we free or are we not? And what does that look like, right? And then, but I personally want to make it a practical thing, right? I do want to say that, look, if we are free, then technically, you might be shy, but if we have control over it, you can become confident, so I do want to take that practical approach to freedom or determinism, right? Like the fixed versus growth mindset. So not only the metaphysical, are we or are we not, but how can we apply that to the individual, and what does that look like if we are, if this account is right, what does that look like for the person? And then we can start building on top of that.
Sure. I mean, if you're talking about the metaphysics of completely setting a will through a series of SFAs, I mean, that might seem foreign to a lot of people, and just simply because it doesn't happen that often, or may not likely happen that often.
Yeah.
But if you're talking about SFAs as like character formation and like deciding what kind of person you want to be, I mean, obviously that fits in with all kinds of moral theories and issues, right? That would be very meaningful to a lot of people and can help with, kind of what you're talking about before, self-help, right?
Yeah, and like I think this comes up without people even knowing that it's free will and determinism, right? It's like, I can't, I just wasn't born confident, let's say, or maybe that wasn't in my plans, or God had a different plan for me, or A, B, C, like things that are outside of my control, and they kind of just shirk responsibility, or can all control away. And I want to say that, look, like there, maybe maybe you do have some control over the situation, even if it's super limited, right? Or even if it's only in certain domains or something like that. That's where the theory comes in. It's like, okay, where can that be located? But I don't want to give away all responsibility. And
I mean, even talking about these issues in certain ways, I mean, you could start talking about ways to try to make sure that people do have more SFAs or more opportunities for SFAs, right? I mean, there does seem to be, like that much more practical sort of route that you could take where you can try to articulate different ways that people can try to be more free, I guess, right?
Yeah, and and where do we get that control back? And that's kind of where I was bringing in discrepancy, right? Like, I think we have control over, so if we are free in moments of ambivalence, right? The businesswoman is free because she's choosing between the kind of person she wants to be. I think we can locate some semblance of control in the discrepancy we have. So, the businesswoman had to first, think about who she is and who she wants to be, or else that inner ambivalence would have never appeared, right? Like if she had no doubt in her mind that she's this ambitious person, whatever, then that occasion would have never come up. So it's by reflecting on who you are and who you could possibly become that ambivalence arise, which allows for a self-forming action for you to shape your character. So as long as we have the capacity to, be like, okay, I am this unconfident person. I have I could become a confident person. That creates a discrepancy, right? A displeasure or discontent or something like that within yourself, who I am now versus who I could be. That creates an ambivalence, and then choices become, even if it's through like a perception bias or something, you start seeing choices where you could act either, for example, the businesswoman, moral or ambitious, right? It's become, it's been brought to her attention. She's contemplating between the different kinds of person she could be because has a discrepancy within herself. She noticed that, okay, I'm this ambitious person, but I could also become this moral person. And then maybe she would have ignored the assault a month ago, but now that she's thinking about the different kinds of people she could be, and there is that discrepancy where we could locate the control, right?
Well, I think that's I like that there's this part of your paper where you talk about these kinds of issues, and I think it's kind of, it reminded me of a sort of line of thinking from Dewey, right? Where people don't just passively see things. Like when you see things, it usually involves actively looking, right? You have to fix your gaze. You have to look in a certain direction. Maybe you have to squint your eyes, right? Or something like that. So for example, the woman in the case, right? She stops, she dwells, she looks, right? Yeah. I mean, these are all based on what she's doing, not just because she happened to sort of stumble across something, right?
Exactly. And that, I think that's exactly where, for the average person, where we can bring back control. Like, is there an aspect of yourself that you're unhappy with, and that, as long as you believe that you have somewhat control, then we could have a deeper discussion about what that looks like and where you could change. But metaphysically, is it even possible? Let's hope so. Or if not, we're all kind of just trapped in this thing, and we're acting for things outside of our control, right? And I also don't want it to be fully free and completely based on luck. I do want to be responsible for the person I am, right? And I do want the capacity to change that person.
So I noticed, you talk about like accounts of freedom that you want, right?
Mm-hmm.
But is it should is it important to talk about a conception of freedom that we like, or a conception of freedom that we're comfortable with? Like, what makes us comfortable or not comfortable? It probably has less to do with metaphysics than it has to do with our own psychology. I mean, even how people, for example, in North America today think about freedom is largely rooted in a lot of like philosophy that stems from, the 17th century, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when we're talking about like accounts of freedoms that make sense to us, does it make sense to look beyond just just metaphysics? Does it matter what we want in account of an account of freedom, or should that be secondary or not important at all?
Well, I think it's important. Like, okay, is it important to think about what we would want out of freedom? I'm not saying don't take an objective look, but I still think it's, because how could you say, we're determined, but we still, we're determined to care about our freedom? It just sounds messed up. It seems like you're determined to think about something over which you have no control. And that doesn't sound attractive. So I think caring about what kind of freedom we have and obviously desiring one is natural. Not to say that we shouldn't look at it objectively, right? Like, are we psychologically, like, even does this discrepancy or the place where SFAs arrive, is that purely out of our control or determined because of the scientific factors in our biology? Then that's something we need to know. So I don't think it's separated. But I do think that, having a desire for a certain kind of freedom comes natural over any discussion, maybe. Whether or not that was determined for you to feel that way or not, that's the question we're trying to figure out. But, yeah, I definitely think it's important.
Okay, so this has been another fascinating episode of the Reconstructing Philosophy podcast, talking to more interesting philosophers in the Southern Ontario region. Dani, I want to thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Matt, for having me. This was very fun.
Yeah, it was a great conversation. Really enjoyed it. Alrighty. Okay, well, we'll be back with more exciting philosophy in the future, and stay tuned for that, okay? Alrighty. Bye-bye.